Hello everybody, this is the Voice of Philosophy Doctor on the YouTube Philosophy Lecture, March 2022 Korea, Unit 32-1, a dialectical interpretation of the idea of the goodness in Confucian Analects. First chapter, the beginning of the Chinese philosophy. According to Peng Wuran, a famous Chinese philosopher, the first Chinese philosophy began when the public officers of the Zhou dynasty were expelled and scattered from the palace because of social disorder and riots, and got into civil area, market economy. They became private teachers of the general folk. Confucian scholars are said to have been educational officers, and the Taoists are said to have been royal historians. The great Chinese philosopher Confucius is said to have studied the 6 classical books of liberal arts at that time: classic of poetry, book of music, book of documents, book of rice, I Ching, book of change, and the spring and the autumn annals. The courtship of Confucius means the realization of social order through the former moral etiquette and manners. The courtship was actually a very significant element in feudalistic society, that is, in Zhou dynasty. The feudalistic social order was kept through the vertical human relations, among which in ancient China the loyalty and the filial piety were counted as especially important. The music is inclined to integrate society by means of songs and dances. Confucius, however, tried to revive the overset traditional values, that is, the 6 classical books and the courtesy and the music, in his own way. That is, he was not satisfied with the mere acceptation of the traditional values, but wanted to lay the foundation of the transport values. He didn't ignore them, but wanted to validate them. Chapter 2, the restoration of the old values through the new principle. The master said, to keep old knowledge warm and get new makes the teacher. As he revealed, our old knowledge is to be kept warm. However, it is not enough. On the ground of the old knowledge, a new knowledge is to be created. It is the role of the teacher. Then what is the new knowledge? I think it is the concept of the goodness, the Ren. This character has been translated in various ways: benevolence, humaneness, and the virtue proper to humanity, and love. I translated into goodness. The translation is, however, not so important. What matters is that Confucius wanted to reinterpret the old knowledge with the concept of the goodness, Ren. The characteristic of the goodness of Confucius is that it is spontaneous and voluntary. It might be thought of as an innate idea. He wanted to reform the heteronomous values through the autonomous idea, goodness. The traditional value concept, for example, loyalty or courtesy, might not be so voluntary and spontaneous as goodness, Ren. The general validity of those value concepts are not evident, Confucius thought. Those ideas might be given from the outside, for example, through the mere tradition and the teaching and the coercion. Unlike these delivered traditional values, the goodness is thought of as innate, spontaneous. The master said, "Is goodness so far a thing? I long for goodness, and lo, goodness is come." Analects, Book 7, Chapter 29. In terms of a modern Western philosophy, the goodness of Confucius might be compared with the innate idea by Descartes, which occurs within me. Furthermore, the goodness is the foundation of the 2 opposite principles of society and mankind, namely courtesy and music. Courtesy and music would be useless without the goodness, said Confucius. As over said, courtesy was the principle of social hierarchy, and the music was that of social unity in the feudalistic Zhou dynasty. The Chinese word of music, which has various meanings besides music, to enjoy, pleasure, to like, etc. Therefore, music can play the role of emotional agreement among humans by Confucius. Chapter 3, the goodness as a dialectical unity of the opposite. As above discussed, Confucian concept of the goodness is not a normal concept, a determinate concept. Rather, it might be called a complementary concept, the relation of courtesy and the music. Furthermore, Confucius manifests the dialectical unity of goodness, saying that goodness is to conquer self and turn to courtesy, and saying soon afterwards, goodness is to love man. In the former phrase, goodness means moral, which contains courtesy and etiquette. Moral is the widest concept of the social rules. Moral opposed to instinct, desire, and emotion. The ego, me, is generally a bundle of desires. In this respect, Confucius regards goodness as moral, 극기 복례 위인. However, in the latter of a phrase, Confucius says that goodness is to love man. Analects, Bk.12 Ch.22. Love is the most intrinsic feeling of man. Therefore, the goodness of Confucius refers to feeling, liking, or and inclination. In other contexts, the goodness sticks together with pleasure or enjoyment. In this regard, the goodness of Confucius can imply the dialectical unity of moral and inclination in the meaning of Kant and Hegel. Kant defined the moral as a subordination of liking and inclination to the practical reason, that is moral. Hegel's dialectic stands for the identity of the opposite. From this perspective, the goodness of Confucius is to be sort of a dialectical or complementary unity of the opposite, the unity of virtue and pleasure. These things point out that the goodness is a dialectical unification of reason and emotion. In other words, goodness is the balance between reason and emotion. Otherwise, goodness can be exchanged with the doctrine of the mean. The goodness as the unity of reason and sensibility appears again in other parts of the Analects. Man of the goodness alone can love others or hate others. How can a man of goodness hate others? This hatred here is not an important hatred. It is a moral, intellectual hatred or righteous anger. The man of goodness hates the evil in a person who is bad. Therefore, man of goodness alone can love others or hate others. This matter of fact, we can name dialectical unity of goodness. Chapter 4, Goodness and Deliberation. As above discussed, the goodness of Confucius is to be regarded as the dialectical unity of the opposite. However, the goodness is originally the thing of action, praxis. Therefore, the nature of this unity must be investigated more specifically. In order to achieve the goodness, man should behave himself wisely as well as virtuously. In this regard, Confucius emphasized both virtue and wisdom. Virtue alone cannot satisfy the demand of goodness. For example, courage or integrity alone cannot fulfill the demand of the goodness. Goodness is unity of the opposite. Confucius interpreted the famous brothers of virtue, Bo-yi and Suki, as masters of the goodness. Bo-yi and Suki did not accept the unrighteous king and fled to the wilderness of the Suyang mountain and lived on fiddlehead ferns, which was a symbol of a protest against the unethical regime, and lastly they starved themselves to death. These brothers have been praised for their loyalty and righteousness all the time through Chinese history. However, the estimate and understanding of the Confucius about the brothers are somewhat different from usual judgment. The master said the boy and the Suki did not remember the former wickedness of man in mind, and hence the resentments towards them were few. Analects Book 5, Chapter 22. If the virtuous brothers really ignored or forgot the wrongdoing of an unethical king, they needed not flee to the mountains. To forget the former wickedness and milden resentment is, however, goodness by Confucius. In this regard, the goodness is thought of as morality combined with life. Contrary to his successors, Confucius did not neglect the value of individual life and the pleasure in front of the virtue. That's it. Thank you very much.